When you think of New Mexico, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Possibly Albuquerque, aliens, or even ancient dwellings from civilizations long since past. But have you heard of the Lincoln County War, the Regulators, or Sheriff Pat Garrett? Or how about Henry McCarty, otherwise known as legendary Billy the Kid? While driving eastbound on Highway 380 through one of the most scenic routes in New Mexico, I stumbled upon the unincorporated town of Lincoln. This small two-lane road introduced me to a forgotten chunk of Wild West history. While Lincoln County is the largest county in the country, the town itself is only a few blocks, at most. Signs reading, Lincoln Historical District greet you from both east and west entry. Scattered throughout the town streets and on nearly every building are New Mexico historical markers. This only fueled my interest due to the fact that unincorporated towns do not typically have a local government and exist by tradition only. By taking one glance at a marker, I knew this town had more to say. This is the story of Lincoln County War. The Lincoln County War was a conflict between rival cattle barons in the 19th century New Mexico territory. At the time, Lincoln County was the largest county in the nation, covering 1/5 of New Mexico territory. In the early 1870s, two men by the names of Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan owned the only store in Lincoln County, Murphy and Dolan Mercantile and Banking. Soon, another man named John Riley also entered the business. In addition to the store, Murphy and Dolan also owned large cattle ranches. Having influential territorial ties to officials in Santa Fe, the merchants were able to obtain several lucrative contracts with the military at Fort Stanton. After he was released, Billy soon joined the posse led by Dick Brewer. Before long, Murphy and Dolan Mercantile and Banking monopolized the trade of the county, controlling pricing, making immense profits off their goods, and virtually having hand on nearly every part in the county. The merchants, along with their allies, which included local law enforcement, were familiarly known as the House. For obvious reasons, Murphy and his allies were disliked by the small farmers and ranchers in Lincoln County as they were forced to pay high costs for their goods, while at the same time accepting low prices for their cattle. In 1877, Alexander McSween, a lawyer, and John Tunstall, a wealthy 24-year-old English cattleman and banker, set up a rival business called H. Tunstall and Company, near the one owned by Dolan, Murphy, and Riley. Furious at this development, Dolan attempted to goad Tunstall into a gunfight. However, Tunstall refused to use violence himself, but soon recruited Billy the Kid officially as cattle guard. In February 1878, the House proprietors obtained a court order to seize some of Tunstall's horses as payment for outstanding debt. When Tunstall refused to surrender the horses, Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady formed a posse led by Deputy William Morton to seize them. After protesting the presence of the posse on his land, Tunstall was shot in the head on February 18, 1878. This incident started what became what was known as the Lincoln County War. Billy the Kid was deeply affected by the murder, claiming that Tunstall was one of the only men that treated him as though he were freeborn. After Tunstall's funeral, Billy swore, "I'll get every son of a gun who helped kill John if it's the last thing I do." Adding fuel to the fire, it was rumored that Tunstall had been murdered for the orders of James Dolan and Lawrence Murphy. However, Billy would not be able to immediately exact his revenge, as he, along with Fred Waite, was briefly jailed by Sheriff William Brady. After he was released, Billy soon joined the posse led by Dick Brewer, Tunstall's ranch foreman, called the Regulators. The group's primary aim was to hunt for the Tunstall killer, William Morton. Supporting them was a large ranch owner named John Grisham, who owned more than 100,000 head of cattle. On March 6, 1878, the Regulators tracked Morton in the county side. After a 5-mile running gunfight, Morton surrendered to the condition that his fellow deputy sheriff, Frank Baker, would be returned alive to Lincoln. However, on the third day of the journey back to Lincoln, March 9th, Billy and another regulator killed the prisoners along with one of the fellow regulators that had tried to stop them. Three weeks later, Billy and several regulators holed up in Tunstall's store while Sheriff William Brady was searching for the killers of his deputies. They ambushed the sheriff and his men on April 1st, 1878, killing Sheriff Brady and mortally wounding one of his deputies. On July 19, 1878, McSween and his supporters, including Billy the Kid, were besigned as by the new sheriff, George Pepin, as a group of his men. McSween's house was set on fire and several people were shot dead as they came out of the house, including an unarmed Alexander McSween. At first, Governor Wallace felt the conditions in Lincoln County might call for martial law. The president, however, advised lawbreakers to return to peace. On November 13, 1878, Governor Wallace proclaimed amnesty for all those involved in Lincoln County War if they were not convicted of murder. Officially, this ended the Lincoln County War, but not before 19 people had been killed in the conflict. Susan McSween, Alexander McSween's widow, hired Huston Chapman as her attorney after her husband was killed. Chapman was murdered on February 18, 1879. James Dolan was accused of the murder, but with powerful friends, the case against him was dropped. Meanwhile, Dolan purchased the property previously owned by John Tunstall. On December 15, 1880, Governor Wallace put a $500 reward on Billy the Kid's head. In September 1878, President Rutherford Ford B. Hayes removed New Mexico's corrupt governor, Axtell, from office and appointed Lew Wallace as New Mexico's new governor. With a $500 bounty on his head, Billy the Kid fled the county. Newly elected Sheriff Pat Garrett made it his mission in life to capture Billy the Kid. Garrett, from the time of his election, spent very little time in Lincoln County, trailing Billy the Kid all over New Mexico. Garrett finally tracked Billy to a little town called Stinking Springs, and after a bloody shootout, Billy was arrested. Billy was tried and sentenced to a hanging. With his execution scheduled for May 13, 1878, Billy the Kid was transported back to Lincoln and held in the Lincoln County Courthouse under guard by two of Garrett's deputies, James Bell and Robert Ollinger. He was held on the top floor, which had no jail cells. He was handcuffed and shackled and held at gunpoint, waiting for his sentence to be carried out. On April 28th, Pat Garrett was out of town shopping for lumber to build the gallows to hang the kid. Billy, being very clever and stealthy, had made several escapes from jail in the past. He had a reputation for making a getaway without being caught. Billy had a secret. He had large wrists and small hands. He was able to easily slip out of handcuffs without ever being noticed. On this day, Billy was alone on the second floor of the courthouse. Bell was downstairs and Ollinger was across the street. He slipped his cuffs and took out a gun that had been secretly hidden for him on his last trip to the courthouse. He quietly waited for Deputy Bell to come up the stairs. As he heard him come around the corner, he politely apologized for Bell what he was about to do, then promptly shot him dead. Deputy Ollinger, eating lunch in the nearby Worty Hotel, heard the shots. He knew what was happening. He realized he had left his new rifle in the courthouse and muttered to the people around him that he was about to die. Billy shot Ollinger from the second-story window with Ollinger's own rifle as he approached the courthouse. Residents at the time claim after killing Bell, Billy was in no rush. Though his legs were still shackled, Billy made his way down the narrow hall to the arsenal room, then the balcony. The people, having heard the commotion, were all outside of the restaurant at the time. Billy yelled out for something to break the shackles, and the townspeople obliged. Billy then asked for a horse, and the townspeople obliged. Billy had to go down the very stairway in which he killed Bell. He was having trouble getting on the horse, and it's even reported that someone held his guns for him at that time. Billy promised to send the horse back to its rightful owner. Then he rode off into the western sun. A few days later, the horse had come back with a leading rope, but no leader. Nobody knows if Billy sent the horse back or if Billy even survived. Billy stunned the territory by killing both of his guards and escaping on a stolen horse, riding off to live another day. That was the day William McCarty, William H. Bonney, Billy the Kid, became a household name, and perhaps our nation's greatest Wild West legend. Not everyone believes Billy the Kid was shot dead and buried in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. But if he had indeed escaped, where did he go? What did become of him? Some say the answer lies with Brushy Bill Roberts. The emergence of Brushy Bill Roberts. Almost 70 years after Billy the Kid's death, or alleged death according to some, a man named Joe Hines made an interesting confession to his lawyer, William Morrison. In the midst of attempting to claim land belonging to his deceased brother, Hines told his lawyer that he was, in fact, Jesse Evans, a famous Wild West outlaw who had disappeared after being released from prison in 1882 and been living in secret all that time. Then Hines said that he knew another outlaw who'd be living in secret. As Morrison listened intently, Hines revealed that his friend, Ollie Roberts, also known as Brushy Bill, of Hyco, Texas, was none other than Billy the Kid. Morrison immediately reached out to Roberts, and over the course of their correspondence, got him to confess to being Billy the Kid. Over time, and in exchange for a full pardon, Roberts revealed how he'd escaped from what he'd been up to for more than half a century. Brushy Bill Roberts claimed he'd been born William Henry Roberts in Buffalo Gap, Texas. After he escaped from prison in 1881, he adopted the name Oliver P. Roberts, which he lived under for the rest of his life until his death in 1950. And on the night that Pat Garrett supposedly shot Billy the Kid, Roberts claimed that Garrett had actually shot another outlaw named Billy Barlow and told everyone that Barlow's body belonged to Billy the Kid. Meanwhile, the real Billy the Kid, Roberts claimed, slipped into the night and vanished. In addition to claiming that he was Billy the Kid, Brushy Bill Roberts claimed that he'd been a member of the outlaw Jesse James gang. Roberts even went so far as to identify Jesse James as a man named J. Franklin Dalton, claiming to know him well. Was Brushy Bill Roberts actually Billy the Kid? While there were doubts about Brushy Bill Roberts' credibility, a Roberts family Bible listed Oliver Roberts' birthday as sometime in 1879. Many believe this story. Supporters claimed that if Oliver Roberts had an identity he had simply adopted, he wouldn't have cared about the birth date. Further, an examination of Roberts' body shows scars consistent with injuries known to have been sustained by Billy the Kid. Believing Brushy Bill Roberts to be Billy the Kid, William Morrison wrote a book on the subject. Morrison claimed that other outlaws, whose identities were unknown, agreed that Roberts was the Kid. Jose Montoya, for example, even signed an affidavit attesting to the fact. So persuasive was Morrison's book that even former President Harry Truman was convinced. In a letter to Morrison, Truman expressed his support and lamented that Roberts died before he can go in front of the governor in hopes of getting that pardon he wanted. The debate over the validity of Brushy Bill Roberts' claim has persisted into this century. Though numerous attempts have been made, the most recent in 2004, to definitively prove that Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid, none have been successful. DNA testing has gotten off the ground, and sophisticated facial match testing between photographs of Roberts and Billy the Kid have proven tantalizing to believers, though ultimately the results have been mixed and non-conclusive. When he died in 1950, Brushy Bill Roberts was buried in Hyco, Texas, under a headstone claiming he was Billy the Kid. Another headstone sits in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, claiming the real Billy the Kid lies under it. In reality, it's likely an educated guess about the actual burial site because the regular cemetery was washed away. Another Billy the Kid? In conjunction with my presentation of the facts regarding Billy the Kid claimant Brushy Bill Roberts, I decided to do the same for a lesser known claimant, John Miller. Due to the fact that Miller never obtained the fame of Roberts, he has not been as deeply researched, and therefore his life is even more mysterious and cloudy than Brushy's. Another thing that makes Miller unique as a claimant is that he's never told his story publicly. Rather, his claim has only begun to receive recognition when his various friends and associates began propagating it after his death. Since Miller never publicly spoke of his claim, all that we know of it is based on second-hand information, making it almost a claim of a claim. Below is a synopsis of what we do know of Miller's life. John Miller first comes into historical record on August 8, 1881, when he was married to a Mexican girl named Isora in Las Vegas, New Mexico Territory. At the quick wedding ceremony, Miller was reported to be wearing a pistol on his hip and to have appeared weak with a relatively flesh bullet wound easily visible through his shirt. Shortly after they were wed, Miller and his new bride left Vegas for the West. And sleeping during the day, the couple eventually made it to Albuquerque, and from there continued to the west until they arrived in El Morro. There they stayed for a few days before moving on to Reserve, a mining town where they remained until Miller recovered. When better fit to travel, the Millers moved onto the Quemundo area, where Miller acquired a job as a cook for the cattle company known as Nation's Ranch. Soon after, Miller became engaged in a gunfight with a Mexican ranch hand. Although neither Miller nor the ranch hand were wounded in the fight, the incident cost Miller his job, and Isora were again forced to flee. This time back to El Morro, and from there to the Zuni Mountains in north-central New Mexico Territory. Along the way, the Millers met prominent cattleman and rancher Jesus, who hired Miller to look after the section of his large herd for the next 5 years. When the 5 years were over, Escancho promised Miller that he could have 5 of the new cattle that would be born over that span. Throughout the 5 years, the Millers lived in caves and abandoned cabins and kept mostly to themselves. When Miller's job was complete, Rancho fulfilled his promise to them, and the Millers soon built a house and a ranch for himself on a hillside south of Rama, or near Ojo, a site that would later be known as Miller's Canyon. Over the next several years, Miller established himself as a talented horseman and a prominent rancher, and continually added to his house. He and Isora made many friends of the Rama Zuni community and were generally well liked by all. The couple even managed to gain something of a Good Samaritan reputation for housing and feeding travelers and helping out their neighbors when they were down on their luck. However, Miller also apparently had the visage of a fugitive from law, always wearing a pistol, having a ready rifle at the door of his house. Miller frequently delighted in displaying his incredible skill with a pistol and enjoyed teaching some of his tricks to his younger friends. His friends later reported that Miller loved to tell stories of Billy the Kid and the Lincoln County War, and often displayed numerous bullet scars on the body. Another favorite trick of his was to have someone tie a rope around his wrists as tight as they could, then merely slip his hands out with the greatest of ease. However, Miller always made it a point not to come out and actually say that he was Billy the Kid. Nevertheless, nearly all he told his stories to connected the dots and believed that he was truly the famous outlaw. On a few rare occasions, though, Millard would confide in a few friends that he deeply trusted that he was Billy the Kid. In equally rare instances, when Miller would get drunk, he would also blurt out that he was the kid, only renege on the claim when he'd sobered up. Isadora, however, who only spoke Spanish, was far more open in admitting that Miller was Billy the Kid. Friends also noted that the couple kept a large trunk with them and was seemingly their most important possessions, and that they always kept it locked, leading many to believe that the trunk's contents were artifacts from Miller's life as a kid. Despite the fact that his neighbors believed Miller was the kid, none of them apparently thought much of it or thought any less of him as a person. Not everyone believes Billy the Kid was shot dead and buried in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, but enough people do to make his grave one of the most visited of all Wild West burial spots. Billy was, probably, killed on July 14, 1881, then carried a couple of hundred yards to the fort's old cemetery and buried with two of his gang members, who had been killed only a few months earlier.